Hi, I'm Delisa Renadeo, and the date is May 1st, 2021. Wow, almost said 2017. I'm having a time warp here. And I'm in Alaska, and I am going to talk about preparing your plants to go into the garden by hardening them off. And so the first question is, what does hardening off mean? It doesn't really sound very friendly, but what it really means is acclimating plants that have been started in a building, in the house or a greenhouse, where it's very protected and where the temperature doesn't get too cold and the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't beat down. Getting them acclimated to going from this very protected environment to going outside, where the sun is much more intense. Even on a cloudy day, there's more sun than there is light on your plants indoors, even if you've got grow lights over them. So the sun's energy is much more potent. And then you also have some breezes and, there are more dangers to our plants outside. And when I say dangers, I don't mean that in a bad way. It just means that you're going from a protected environment to one where you have a lot more things to deal with. So hardening them off is the process of acclimating them to a new environment so that they don't get overwhelmed. So I'm just going to show you what some plants can look like after you started them in the house. These are all different kinds of kale plants, and that's why they all look different from each other, because they're different varieties. I started them in the house about, well, I don't have the date right here, but maybe 6 weeks ago. And it's too early to plant them in the ground yet, which is fine because they need to be hardened off. So hardening off means that you just gradually get them acclimated to the conditions outdoors. And what happens if you don't harden them off is that they basically can get sunburned. And so just think about yourself. If you live indoors most of the year and then you decide to take a trip to Hawaii or someplace like that, and you're going to head straight for the beach, and the chances are you're going to get a bad sunburn the very first day. And then you're going to spend the rest of your vacation recovering from your sunburn, and you're not going to really get to enjoy the beach that much. So same thing happens with the plants. If we take them straight from in the house and stick them out in the sun, and they say, oh, plants love sun. Well, yes, they do. I love sun too. But if I get it all at once, then I get burned, and they get burned too. And just like your sunburn on the first day of your vacation sets you back so that you don't get to actually be outside much in the rest of your vacation because you're too damaged already, and so you're recovering from it. Same thing happens to the plants. So they get kind of a bleach look on them often, or sometimes the leaves might turn a little reddish, and that's an indication of some sunburn. And the plants have the same ability that we have, or maybe it's the other way around. We have the same ability that the plants have to actually have protective substances that come out gradually, a little at a time. They don't come out in the first 5 minutes of being out in the sun, but over a period of time, those protective substances can protect your plant so they won't get sunburned. And that's how, when we are out in the sun and we start to get a tan, that tan is actually protecting us from getting a burn. So our plants don't turn tan, they get green, and their leaves get a little bit thicker and stronger. They're not quite as just, really vulnerable as they are when they're growing in the house. So we need to introduce them gradually to the conditions that they're going to be in. And so there's a couple of different ways of doing this, but the important thing is to be sure you do it. And it takes several days, a week, even more than a week is a good thing. And so you want to give them a short time outside and then bring them back in. And by a short time, I might mean like maybe 2 hours. So this is sort of the classic description of it, and then I'll give you an alternative. The classic way would be to find a place to go put them outside where they won't get full sun in the middle of the day. Again, it's just like you going to the beach. You're not going to go out at noon, high noon, from noon until 2, because you're going to get burned. But if you could go outside to more of a shady area, maybe under some trees or next to the house where the sun is blocking the sun. A couple of hours outside and then back in. And then on the second day, maybe add 2 more hours and give them 4 hours outside and then back in. And then 6 hours back in, or outside and back in, but not in full hot sun. Give them a place where, what I love to do is find a place where there's some tree branches over it, so it's kind of mottled. So there's some shade and some sun. And so they're getting a little bit of sun, but you can also watch them. And if they start to get kind of their leaves start to get a little bit light colored, then you can see that, ooh, that was a little too much. Just like if you see your skin gets a little too pink, okay, that's a little too much. So back off. Now, after doing that for, until you can at least get up to 6 hours, then you might be able to leave them out full time, but in a place that is not in the absolute most sunny part of your yard. So a part of your yard where it'll get some sun and then the sun will pass over and it'll be a little bit more shade. So the sun is the biggest part of this acclimation, but it's not the only part, because wind and rain and temperature fluctuations, we in the house, your temperature is not going to fluctuate as much as it does outside for most of us. And so your plants might be used to only a 10-degree difference in the house, and then outside it may be a 40-degree difference or something. And so we have to just let them get used to that. And they will. They are easily adapted to it if we are gentle with them. So there's another alternative way that doesn't require as much moving things back and forth, which is good, because it can, if you have this little tray I have, well, I've got 12 of these trays that I've been moving around. I have been already hardening them off. And here's a little funny factoid. I've been keeping them in the greenhouse at night, and then I bring them outside during the day. And the place that I'm bringing them outside is not very far from where they are in the greenhouse. But when I'm carrying 12 of them, 12 round trips, I have my cell phone in my pocket and my pedometer is always keeping track. It's a half a mile, which is pretty funny, just taking my plants in and out. So it's a half a mile in the morning and a half a mile at night, just doing that. So there is quite a lot of time and energy expended in doing this. So there is an easier way if you have the right conditions. And that is to do this on a cloudy day where it's overcast all day long. And then you can just leave them outside all day long. And I was just learning from somebody else about this. And he says that if you do it for 3 days, all day long on cloudy days, that will give you, it will acclimate them so that now you can actually put them out in the garden. So you may not have 3 cloudy days, and if it's raining, I mean, that's good too, but they're still going to be getting acclimated. Now, you don't want anything that's going to be too stressful for them and wipe them out. So not only too much sun, but like too much wind. So if it's a really windy day, whipping them around, you need to put them in a protected area. And you might even have them like in a cardboard box or a big tub. And so that they're outside, but the wind can't just whip them around. But a little breeze is actually a good thing, because it helps to strengthen their stems if they have a little bit of stress on them. But we don't want them whipping around. So think about them kind of like you think about yourself. So you don't want too much sun too quickly. You don't want too much wind, but a little breeze can feel good. And even if you are out in the wind, in the sun, it feels kind of good when a cloud goes over and it cools off a little bit, and then maybe the sun comes out again. So the plants are kind of like that. But once they are used to it, then they can handle a lot. Now, there is another way to protect your plants from the sun, and that is with something called row cover. And that's what this fabric is. It's a very thin fabric, very, very light. And so you can drape this over your plants. I'm going to show you. And it's not going to push the leaves down. It'll hold them up. And that's another way to protect them. So for instance, if you wanted to put them in part of the yard where there's sun part of the day and then shade part of the day, maybe you just cover them up with the row cover during the sunniest part of the day. And then you can take it off when the sun goes around behind the tree or behind your house or something. So there's different ways to do it, but the point is you're gradually introducing them to the conditions that they will be living in. Now, at this time of the year in Alaska, and probably lots of places, you really have to pay attention to the temperatures, like the nighttime temperatures. Last night it froze here, it went down into the 20s. And so I did not leave these plants out in the greenhouse overnight because I knew they would freeze out there. So we brought them into the garage overnight. And so now I will be taking them out back outside when it gets up to about 40 degrees, which 40 degrees is pretty cold compared to my house, but they've been getting used to that outside. So they won't have any trouble with that. But if they'd frozen last night, even though these are the kinds of cold hardy plants that can tend to withstand colder temperatures, because these are all different kinds of kale, until they're used to it, you don't want to shock them. They're youngsters here, take good care of your youngins. So when to plant them out in the garden is always a little bit of a question. And first of all, you need to make sure they've been hardened off. Don't be in a hurry. I used to always be in a hurry. I would buy these starts at a greenhouse and they would look so beautiful. And I'd say, I'm going to get them in the ground. They'd say, no, harden them off. I said, oh, it doesn't matter. So I plant them and then it would set them back. I used to do the same thing at the beach. I'd get the sunburn and then I'd, I'm a slow learner. But now I don't do that anymore because it didn't kill them, but it would just set them back. And so they wouldn't really grow very well for a while because they would be recovering from the shock of being out in the garden when they hadn't had a chance to prepare. But you can keep them above ground so that you can move them around as long as you need to. You can do that for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but then they'll be growing and you'll need to get them out into the garden. So you want to make sure that you're not expecting a hard freeze after they're out in the garden. So you can look online to find out what is your expected last freeze date. And for the most part, I don't plant things out there before I expect that. But here's where you can protect yourself with this fabric or some other kind of cover. If you're expecting a freeze and you have your things already planted, you can cover them and that will protect them a surprising amount. I try not to put them through that. I try not to put myself through that because I've been raising these babies for, over a month. And I get very worried when I think they might get hurt. But anyway, if you have like a cabbage plant that's out in the garden and you're not going to dig it up and they're kind of far apart, one thing you can do is if you have some larger like pots, large plant pots that are empty, you can just turn some pots upside down over each one. So I have some pots that are about this big. which will fit perfectly over the top of a plant if you're going to have uh, unusually cold weather after they get in the garden. But this also works really well too. This does let light through. So even if you leave them covered up with this, they can still grow. And so some of the plants, like zucchinis, like warmer temperatures than I get in my yard. So I am going to cover mine with this row cover, maybe for, I don't know, maybe for a few weeks. I'm going to try it out. But I'm getting a little beyond the hardening off. But the basic idea is treat your little plants like the babies that they are and the youngsters that they are. And they've been living indoors with a lot of protection. And now when they go outside, you know, they've got a lot of adjusting to do, and they have the ability to do it. They're designed that way, just like we are. But they take a little time to do that. If you have any critters around, you also may need to protect them from the critters, because these tender little leaves, this is the first green thing that they might see. So if there's rabbits around or moose, I would put them someplace where the moose couldn't get them, or the rabbits. So, you know, you may put them in a little fenced in area or up on some, of course, with moose, it would have to be something really high, but you can just set them outside on a picnic table or a card table or something. So they're not on the ground where they're going to get eaten by little things. We did put a moose fence around our yard, so I don't worry about that now, but it would be pretty heartbreaking to go outside and find that the tops of, you know, all my 12 flats of plants had been eaten. So be careful about that. Okay, I hope that will help you. Do take the time to harden off or acclimate your little plants so that they can survive when they get into the garden more easily. Thanks for joining me.